Hey there, everybody. Welcome to the Blackbar podcast. My name's Nick. You didn't see it, but just before we went live, we had some pretty crazy changes that had to happen. And you know what? That's on theme because one of the topics we're talking about today is how to be creative when the plan changes last minute.
I just about jumped over my desk to change my camera battery.
Was the battery the battery?
It was the
all
battery.
Of a sudden we lost Zach, and he's like, "Oh no!" And
We were just casually
at, like, 12.
bantering beforehand, and I was like, "Oh wait!"
Man.
Sorry, Nick. I cut off your intro with my unexpected situation.
Dude, it's fine. You know, this is the whole thing of like rolling with the punches and whatnot. But yeah. Welcome to the Blackbar podcast. My name's Nick. Obviously, I'm joined by Zach and Caleb today. How are you guys doing aside from the really fast battery change?
I'm
good.
Fine. Doing
good.
All right.
I'm great.
Yeah.
We have a really good show planned for us today. Like I said, our last topic is going to be how to navigate changes, how to stay creative when the plan changes last minute. But we're also be talking about could Unreal Engine's new project Avalanche dethrone After Effects? That one I'm really interested in. And then I'm going to be talking a little bit about how the new Sony A9 III, there's a lot of new features in it. It's a new photo camera. I think we're going to talk a little bit about it and how it could be valuable to the church creative. And in some ways, it's not going to be valuable. But that's essentially what we got planned for the day. Yeah. Yeah, it's got a very large price tag. So, yeah. Zach, I know you had something that you wanted to discuss with us a bit here. You ready for that?
Of course I am. I wanted to make sure that before we get into our interesting conversation and topics today, I wanted to bring up something which is a bit of a throwback from last week. Caleb, I sent it to you. Could you pull it up, please? Last week on our conversation talking about AI, as well as we dipped a little bit into AI copyright and stuff, and then we joked about Nick and Banksy, and then I initiated and proposed the phrase Nixie. So between the last episode and this episode, oh my gosh, I didn't see that one yet.
This must be new. This
like
has
Nick
to be
Miller
new.
From New Girl.
Yeah,
this is new.
What?
Oh my gosh! But between that
gosh.
last episode and this episode, someone created a Nixie art Instagram page, which Caleb is currently showing right now, featuring AI art that was based around Banksy's style. So this, Nick, did you do this?
No.
Are you sure?
Yes.
Because last episode we talked about it and then it appeared.
How did we find out about this? I'm looking at these for the first time right now. I haven't seen
one of our
any
certified pros sent it to me earlier, like last week. They were like, "Did you see this was created on Instagram?" And
hey Zach, which certified pro?
Listen, I don't want to put any names out there of like if whether or not it was them or they just found it. Clearly someone was a fan enough of the bit to go full in. Like this is not two posts.
I'm here for the bit.
I love it. Yeah. What's the bottom part? SNDY, like Snyder?
No, that's not true. It's not me. Listen, I do not have time for this. How many posts are on this? You're looking at like 25 posts. I don't have time for. Listen, I appreciate the bit, and thank you to whoever did and followed up on the bit. But I do not have time to go this deep into the bit on Instagram. Like, look, okay, open up one of the earlier ones. What was this? What was the soonest the first one was posted?
Yeah,
a week ago?
It's
a
probably.
week ago.
And then, are they posted one day at a time or something like that?
I feel like it's a daily post.
Okay, it's a daily post.
There's been more than there's several every day. There's several every day.
I don't have time for this, so this was not.
This one was posted 9 minutes ago.
Oh my gosh!
They might
I was running around dealing with my camera
now.
9 minutes ago. So boom, I've got coverage.
Who do you guys think it is?
Blaze.
It's Blaze. I'm gonna vote. I guessed Blaze earlier. I'm gonna say Greg at this point. What do you think, Zach?
I'm going to say in the style of Banksy that we may never know.
All right. In the comments, please tell us who do you think it is that created this Instagram account? Was it Greg?
Oh my gosh.
Was it Blaze or we're just never going to know.
Okay.
Never going to know.
Well, go follow Nixie Art on Instagram, because whoever started the page is clearly a fan of the podcast. Speaking of, though, we've got actual content to get into. So, guys, what is our first?
We've got real things.
We've got real things to talk about.
Oh my gosh.
What is our first non-Banksy topic for the day?
Non-Banksy topic. We are talking about.
Nixie. I apologize, Nixie.
Yes,
gotta get it right.
We're talking about Project Avalanche, which is something that I didn't know existed. As of
is that the new Elon Musk project?
Oh boy!
No.
Oh no, Zach, you just opened a can. We are never going to get into this podcast. Oh. I mean, Avalanche is kind of a good description for how he's running Twitter.
Oh, what is Project Avalanche, Caleb?
Got him. Project Avalanche is a new sort of project by Epic Games, and Epic Games makes a bunch of stuff. Their biggest product is definitely the Unreal Engine, and Fortnite and Rocket League and a handful of other things. But they built this Unreal Engine, and the Unreal Engine has been around for literal decades at this point. I believe Unreal Tournament was in the 90s, if I'm remembering correctly. It was the first one. And it's been evolving and evolving and evolving since then. And Unreal Engine 5 is the version we're on right now. And if you're at all familiar with video game rendering tech and Unreal specifically, it is unreal how real Unreal is. We're all gamers. We've seen the tech before. Yes. It's pretty incredible. We're not going to talk about video games today because as much as we definitely could fill an hour with it, it's not relevant to the topic. However, what is relevant to the topic is that a bunch of companies and organizations started using Unreal Engine for live production broadcast special effects. There was a variety of applications on ESPN. During the Super Bowl, it was used a little bit to create these really big 3D motion graphic type stuff that was inputted into the camera shots that were happening. It doesn't have to be inputted into the camera shots. It can just be sort of standalone stuff. But Epic Unreal started to realize that, the companies were interested in these sorts of applications. But Unreal's not really built to do that kind of thing. It doesn't have a timeline editor. It doesn't have the kind of things you would expect in a motion graphics engine. Yeah. So they decided to put a team on it. And Project Avalanche is the motion graphics / animation workflow for Unreal Engine. If you've ever used like a video nonlinear editor like Final Cut or whatever, or Premiere, usually there's like a couple different workflows at the top. You could be in like import mode or editing mode or color mode or whatever. This is just Unreal's motion graphics mode. So you still open up Unreal, to my understanding, and then you get into Project Avalanche. I imagine it'll just be called animation or something like that. It's in beta right now, and the only way you can get access to the beta is if you work for basically a Fortune 500 company that does media broadcast. The only people who are getting in right now are like, ESPN and Fox and CNN and yada. So I can't get in, unfortunately. Blackbar is not quite yet a Fortune 500 company. But supposedly this thing is launching full in first quarter next year, just before GDC, Games Done Quick, or Game Developer Conference. GDQ is Game Done Quick. So Q1 next year, this thing is going to come out. Now, this thing has a variety of implications in many different markets, but specifically in the church world, there's some things I think that are important to knowing. Number one, I mean, most churches aren't doing custom animation, and I'll be the first to admit and acknowledge that. I think it is definitely not an absolutely necessary thing to know. However, I think if you've done video production at all, you're going to run into the point of where, it would be cool to... ... fill in the blank. And if you're ever in a moment where you end up having enough time to start doing some custom animation, it's worth learning. I think learn keyframes and everything like that. And up until this point, After Effects has been, for motion graphics and even some general compositing, pretty much the one and only answer for reasonably priced software that will get you to do this. And it's a part of the Adobe Creative Suite, so it works well with Premiere. It works well with Photoshop, works well with Illustrator. We learned it in college. It is still the industry standard across the board. It also has next to no competition. And I think Adobe's been sitting on that for a really long time.
Where do you think Cinema 4D, I feel like, has been to some extent comparative, but it is a lot more of a complex program. Like, where does that sit in the After Effects like competition timeline?
Cinema 4D is primarily a 3D modeling and animation software. It's not for compositing. Usually, like, you will take whatever you rendered in Cinema 4D and then you drop it into After Effects to composite it in with other footage. So it's really good at some things After Effects can't do. But it can't do anywhere near everything After Effects can do. They work really well together. Sure. But Unreal Engine is about to annihilate After Effects. That's
a big proposition, Caleb.
Yeah,
you're the After Effects
guru. Know After Effects. I use After Effects almost every day. Anytime I'm doing animation motion graphic, I still edit like normal videos that have no animation in After Effects because I'm just preferring it and fast. And I know that's not what you're supposed to do, but I just like it. The Unreal Engine's motion graphic stuff, the Project Avalanche is crazy, and it is for a couple of reasons, specifically for churches. The first thing is their pricing structure. We might see a totally different pricing structure come as soon as this gets launched. But as it stands right now, the pricing structure for Unreal Engine is to download and use the software and to export with no, watermarks or anything like that. The price for that is $0. Jeez. It is completely free. Unreal Engine is primarily an engine for video games. So their normal pricing structure is you create a game with it, you can completely develop the game, you can list the game, you can sell the game, you can make $1 million off the game completely for free, and then after $1 million they charge 5%, is usually how it goes. Now, I don't think most churches are going to be making video games, so I'm not sure when that 5% or whatever the heck would kick in. I'm not sure. It's not. It is reasonable to me that they would change the pricing structure. But considering their perspectives so far on the pricing structure, they're trying to make it as accessible as possible. They want new people to jump into the program. So having it free or having it relatively cheap is going to be an option for them to be running into. So pricing,
free
number
tends
one,
to be the best price.
Free.
Especially for churches.
Doesn't matter. If you have a church of 2 people, you can afford free.
Yeah.
Here's the second thing that's just like brain explodey bit. Unreal Engine is a game engine. Game engines have to run at 30, 60, if you're a real PCMR master race, 120, 140 frames per second.
Exactly.
Instead of some loser who's still playing on PlayStation in 2023.
Of course, Zach. Just
Nope. No.
Sorry, I called you out.
No, yeah, I have. We'll talk later. Yeah.
Oh snap!
It runs at 60 frames per second. That isn't going to change in this engine. Typically in After Effects or any motion graphics, any video editing software, you make your changes, you tweak your keyframes, you do your complex 3D whatever the heck, and then you have to hit enter or space bar or whatever, and then you sit and wait as the thing renders, however many frames that you need renders. And that could be really quick. Sometimes it's near live. Sometimes I've waited upwards of 60 seconds for a single frame, depending on the complexity of the scene, right? So this is live. Like I'll scroll through some of the stuff that they show off, but even some of the stuff that we were looking at before, let me see right here. Like this is for the Dallas Cowboys, I'm pretty sure, but all of this stuff, the background,
this is called football, by the way.
Yes, football. That was NASCAR. I'm pretty sure it's when they drive cars too fast
driving cars?
and turn left.
Wow, so that's their green screen studio. That's phenomenally.
Yes, and this
crazy.
is happening all completely live, right? There's no rendering happening in the back. They don't need to pre-render any of this stuff. They get into some of the so this is for Rocket League. This is now video game sports time. It's way more interesting. But all of this is rendered live. Like you can take the viewport window and you could fly up into any of those things and just start swapping out the text, swapping out the logos, and it's all instant. There is no rendering. It's all live. The amount of time saving in that this alone brings, I cannot explain. This could be like a 50% decrease in time in some projects, or even more.
Yeah.
So help me just I want to make sure that those that are
Mm-hmm.
watching, for those that have never touched After Effects or anything, or maybe they've heard about this and they're trying to navigate and translate exactly what you're saying, Caleb, because you understand the fullness of the potential value that Unreal Engine could bring with this new software. What does pre-rendered mean, and why is that valuable for your editing process? Because what I'm hearing is you're saying pre-rendered a lot and talking about live editing capability. How does that reflect one-to-one to your editing? Like, how is it going to speed up that workload for someone like you who really feels comfortable in like a software like After Effects?
Yeah. So I'm coming up with this analogy on the fly, but I think it'll be close enough, right? If you were to try to bake a cake right now, you would take all the ingredients and you would throw them in the thing and you put them in the blender. I've never made a cake before, obviously.
Where's Megan? Let's get your wife.
Oh
on.
man,
right.
Yeah, Megan, comment about that blender part.
Yeah, you put them in the cake pan. Then you have to shove it in the oven. And you have to bake it, and that takes an amount of time. Again, I've never made a cake before. And then you pull it out, and if you've made some terrible mistake, like you left the eggshells in or anything, you don't know until right at the end, right there, and then you have to go and bake another cake. Right. And that's sort of how it works. And then that 30 minutes or whatever it took long to bake the cake, you got to do it over again. With the equivalent of Unreal Engine would be like, okay, this cake is going to need eggs, it's going to need flour, whatever. And the second you throw, as soon as you make the changes to the ingredients, the final cake is updated right in front of you, like post bake, right? If at the very end you decide, oh, I left eggshells in there, you just remove eggshells. Cake is already there live. You can pick it up, you can move it around, you could be making modifications to the ingredients, and it's still right there in front of you. That the time saving there, the workflow difference there is just mind-boggling. The difference that it can make.
Go ahead.
I'm about to move on to a different thing that it could do. So if you have a question about this.
I'm just trying to continue to connect those dots. Right now, I'm trying to think of like in our industry, a thing that's already going on, like a comparison. So I'm thinking of like NLEs, non-linear editors for video. Right now, the kings are Premiere and Final Cut. Well, I don't know if Final Cut's a king. Avid would as well be in that. Recently, DaVinci came out of nowhere, became a free software, and is essentially, arguably, top of the line now, competing and pushing back other NLEs. Now, have they fully gained that kingship? Not quite, but the amount of stuff that they're coming out with is massive. If this comes out or releases free or discounted, this could have a similar kind of situation. Avalanche could have a similar comparison with like any of the other animation softwares, where it goes from like nothing to like absolutely comparable as a free option for any content creator.
I think specifically in the world of animation, motion graphics in general, I use After Effects all the time. I've been an After Effects fanboy. I've taught classes on After Effects. Literally the day, and Nick and Zach were both there the day that I watched this video for the first time. Within 90 minutes, I had installed additional software on my computer to start learning the tools that would be necessary to get good at this.
Yes.
Because like if you're a motion graphic artist and you're not planning on fully switching to, or at least learning this, the second it drops, you are going to be in so much trouble in a year. Like I don't understand how you wouldn't at least want to learn the thing in terms of the speed that you're going to be able to go at, in terms of just the tools. And I want to talk about another couple of those in a minute. Like After Effects has no leg to stand on at this point, and Adobe's going to have to do some, like literally, people have been asking them to do it for a year, but like literally from the ground up, rebuilding and restructuring After Effects in order to have the tool set that Unreal Engine. And I don't think it's going to.
And the one qualifier would be if they decide to release in the first quarter with a heavy price tag. That would be the one biggest stopper from this kind of floodgate of animation.
If they decide to hold on to like the 5% after $1 million thing, if you have like an anywhere moderately sized church, that, I mean, $1 million is not $1 million a year. $1 million is $1 million, right? So after any number of years, you pass over $1 million, which most churches will do at some point. Then just you're losing 5% of all tithes coming, like, that's not going to work. And
I'm sure that's probably a conversation in its own. What does a does a qualifier for that earning $1 million mean? You know, and with churches that could get very interesting when it passes that mark.
And I have to imagine that like Fox Sports and ESPN are not handing over 5% of their profits to Unreal. I'm sure there are additional sort of licensing that they have access to. So we'll see what that looks like.
So Caleb, what are the other features that you were talking about then?
So 2 other features that I really want to talk about before we move on. The first one is that this is a fully 2D and 3D animation engine. After Effects technically can do some 3D. You kind of have to break it sometimes to make it work. There are additional plugins to make it. You can import 3D. It's not great at it. It's very bad at building it. You pretty much just import a finished thing, and then you can kind of make it work. But if you're doing serious 3D, you need like Cinema 4D, you need Blender, you need whatever. Unreal makes video games, right? 3D is what they do. 3D is the universe that they live in. That includes fully live ray traced lighting, right? That includes like the best lighting that we have access to built into the system already. They just had to like give you a tool to be able to interface with it. So that's all in. But they have now built this huge 2D system to where like you're able to take a 2-dimensional logo, and I saw them like within effectively 10 seconds take it from completely 2D to like a 3D thing. So here they're just drawing like a 2D shape right here in this thing, and then they can I think they do it in a second.
Is this the program, Caleb? Like, are we looking at what it would look like?
Yeah, so this is a completely 2-dimensional shape, and now it's just 3D, right? And you know, start moving things around. So even if you only have experience like as a graphic designer or whatever, like the on ramp is going to be super easy to jump into this stuff. So 2D and 3D, being able to do like kinetic typography and like complex 3-dimensional scenes with like live action elements all at the same time. That's ridiculous. The breadth of that system is insane. The last thing is, again, this is live, right? It's all rendered live, and it has outputs that are available. It can output with an alpha channel over NDI. So you could use this as a downstream key on top of your streams or on in your LED wall or whatever else you could do. It has a support for the Blackmagic export to be able to produce that live. There's a handful of other ones that I frankly haven't heard of. But the potential, especially if you're rocking like an LED wall or something like that, to be able to build like, what is your pastor preaching about that day? If he's preaching about the Sermon on the Mount, we've talked about this for AR and VR applications, right? So be able to render this beautiful scene of the Mount behind them, and even move objects in and around throughout the sermon. That can be done live. You don't need to pre-render it. You don't need to have like render out the video up to this point and then loop it so you have wind going in the background, and then at this point we'll have this other thing happen, and there'll be this fade or whatever. It's all just live, right? And it's free. It's so like there's so much potential here if they hold on to a reasonable pricing structure for churches. Not every church is going to be able to take advantage of this. The cost of this is time. Not the time that it takes to render, but the time that it takes to build. Animation, motion graphics, it is not something that every church, most churches are going to have the time to do it. But for the ones that can, the ones that do, you're going to be using the same infrastructure and the same tools that freaking Disney used to build the sets of Mandalorian, right? Like it's the same program that you're going to be getting access to. I'm just like, I'm blown away that this is going to be a feature that's coming, and I can't wait to switch over to it. I'm very excited.
It has me, rethinking like even purchase stuff for like computers and stuff. Because this computer that I'm utilizing right now, little peek behind the curtain here, is like getting close to a decade at this point, I'd say. And it struggles through Blender right now, but I think it's time to upgrade some gear so that we can start utilizing this more. Because I know even for like the Blackbar production side, the side of us that does work for other churches and businesses, this is going to be super valuable for us to be able to get new clients. And I mean, even like I imagine like just a hypothetical scenario, some youth convention hires us to do background content on an LED wall for them. If we have someone who is very good at it, you can just have them there live changing things on the fly, and
Yeah.
that would increase their production value immensely. And now we're a hired per project kind of thing. That's not a dedicated salary for someone on staff. That's a lot more doable
Mm.
than perhaps when Caleb, you're talking
Right.
about time and stuff.
Caleb, I know
Oh.
it's largely conceptual since we don't have our hands on the software, but do we know what kind of
Mhm.
like specifications our computers will need to run a software like this, like realistically?
Yeah, I would aim at basically a mid to top end gaming machine, which is a silly thing to say on our church media podcast, but we're talking about a video game engine right
Yeah.
now. The only thing that's changing here is the interface that lets you access that game engine. So you're probably going to want a dedicated GPU. I'd recommend probably if I start listing out name of GPUs and you recognize them, you already know what I'm saying. So I'm not going to list out the name of the GPUs. But you're going to want something with a dedicated GPU. You're going to want something with probably at least 32 gigs of RAM at a base minimum. And you're going to want a CPU with lots of cores. Usually these things like lots of cores. I don't have any specific recommendations as to where to go buy, or go watch Linus Tech Tips. He does great content on this sorts of things.
I have one more question then, Caleb, before we kind of move on to our next topic that I feel like is necessary, because we don't have to get into the specifics because I don't want to lose a bunch of people.
Sure.
But is a software like this, do you think that the Mac universe will be able to run something like this? Because a lot of what you're talking about is higher end PC builds. We always talk about Mac and PC when it comes to the church world. Do you think this will be viable on a Mac desktop?
Unreal Engine is on Mac and it's on Apple Silicon. So yes. Yep.
Cool.
Now that being said, we talked a little bit last week or last episode about Macs versus PCs, what's they're good at, what they're not.
Right.
We're now very squarely in gaming world.
Yes.
And in gaming world, even Apple Silicon, it just gets its butt kicked by proper PC Windows desktops. Hair on your chest, the good stuff, the stuff that's sitting over there, right? So I have yet to see the performance numbers, so I'm not going to comment necessarily on this specific tool in there. But my guess would be a traditional gaming machine with a dedicated graphics card, lots of RAM, and sort of a multi-core CPU is going to be your best bet for Unreal.
All right.
Cool.
I guess we'll see quarter one.
Quarter
how
one.
it turns out.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Our next topic that we want to talk about is I think it's really crazy that we've been looking at a whole bunch of like really new release stuff, right? A lot has been happening in the last 6 months between
What's
like
going
Caleb,
on with that? This year,
right?
so much is dropping.
I don't know if
or
it's
maybe
just
it's just
because,
we have a podcast.
Yeah, maybe it's just because we're like actually
I don't know.
But and I also say it's probably partly AI, right? That's opening up new doors and stuff. But along with this amazing software that's going to open up a whole bunch of stuff, Sony just released in the past couple weeks their A9 III photo camera. And it comes with a couple really important updates that I would say potentially we could see in maybe quarter one or all of next year, 2024. Changes from Canon and Nikon to stay up to date with the direction that photo cameras are moving. Your DSLR, SLR, mirrorless cameras are probably going to start moving this direction. First thing I want to kind of look at, as I pull up my notes here.
Caleb's got it pulled up actually as well, so we can visually see.
If you're looking at the video,
yeah.
Is it okay if we start not with the global shutter, because I think that's actually the biggest thing. Let's talk about I'm going to say the first thing is probably the AI assisted autofocus, right? And so like this is Sony's been doing really good with their AI assisted autofocus. You can have it. I think it's the FX3. I know Johnny Johnny in our comments here. He'll tell me if I'm wrong, but I think it's in the FX3. Um, Also, like it's really good at determining not just like, hey, is this thing like in focus? Am I tracking a face? It has the ability to like track the entire human body, right? And know how the human body is moving and how to follow the focus with that. You're probably going to see it here in just a second, like the human pose estimation. It also can track different wildlife, and so one thing that this camera is definitely 100% for is going to be nature photographers and sports photographers, which kind of poses a bit of a problem if you're a church photographer. There's some applications there, but unless you have like a school attached to your church and it that has like basketball games or something like that, you're probably not going to be utilizing that some of the other features here that it has, namely the two parts I'm going to touch here is the 120 frames per second burst shooting. So you can capture raw photos at 120 frames per second, which is
That's
pretty
so
incredible.
stupid.
It is.
So
I wish we could go to YouTube when we're done the podcast and look for this video that Caleb's showing. You'll hear the audio of the capture, and it just runs super fast. It sounds like it sounds kind of like.
Caleb, can we get that one more
Yeah.
time?
My daughter's really good at making that noise.
Oh my gosh. And then we have pre-shooting, which is a feature that if you've had like the slow and quick capture modes on Sony's camcorders and stuff and some of their other gear, it's very similar to that, where you can be watching something, and it's showing on the screen here, but like you'll be watching something, you see it start moving, and then you start clicking the shutter to take the photo. This feature allows it so that up to like, I think it's a second, 1.6 seconds before you hit the shutter,
Wow.
that it is starting to capture, and that's 120 frames per second capture up to when you hit your shutter button. And I know for me, there's been a bunch of times where I've been doing photography for like worship, or specifically like a concert, where all of a sudden the team lead does something, and I'm like, oh, I wish I had captured that, and I just missed it. Like this would be such a great feature for that. But the big thing that I'm super pumped about, and I'll tell you why here in a second, is the global shutter feature.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of our DSLRs and SLRs are made in a way to have what's called a rolling shutter. And rolling shutter, what that means is that it basically, it's not your sensor is not capturing all pixels all at the same time. It's kind of doing it row by row by row by row, and so that results in some problematic images where, like, if something's moving fast, it kind of starts bending and bowing, and then you get these rolling shutter effects where things are just kind of warped and wobbly looking, right? Global shutter is going to eliminate that, right?
Yeah.
Global shutter is all pixels all at once, which pretty much eliminates that entirely. And I'll tell you what, the one thing that like really really impressed me when it comes to church photography, because it was a problem, Caleb, you and I faced all the time when we were back at Grand Rapids first, especially with the LED walls, and shooting in low light rooms and stuff with fluorescent bulbs, is essentially like the refresh rate of a light can create banding, right?
Yes.
Global shutter eliminates that.
Really?
So yes.
Wow.
Which is freaking awesome. Because like the number of times where I've had to sacrifice my shutter speed to make sure that it's like 1/60, so that I'm hitting the hertz of what the refresh rate of lights are, has been way too many times, right? I've sacrificed my type of photo for the fact that I don't have the banding in my photo, right? And so like, man, it's an incredible. And so like I'm just so pumped about it. But I figure I want to open this up to you guys. What are your thoughts when it comes to like specifically how this relates to the church, because I'm going to give the problematic part here in a bit. But I want to hear what you guys think in terms of like, hey, how is this? How could this be useful for the church?
Well, I'm mostly curious first is like how many of these features are already things that are existing in the current like affordable timeline of gear that's been recently released through Sony or otherwise.
Global shutter is not a thing. I mean, there's been a couple, but not for a long time.
Sure.
I really have to go kind of like the old film cameras to get that kind of stuff. 120 frames per second, that's not a thing. That's not a thing. The be able to pre-shoot, it sounds like, Nick, there was a handful of Sony cameras that have had that functionality for a little while now, but outside of that, these are pretty new. And I do think the applications in the church world, like especially for shooting worship, I guess I'll put the clarifier, I'll say evangelical charismatic worship.
That's probably a good point. Yeah.
Generally speaking, a lower lit room. Generally speaking, someone who's jumping around on their fourth cup of coffee at 9 a.m. It is difficult to get exactly that moment. Not to mention you're dealing with potentially things like LED walls, so you have the banding issues. It is not an easy thing to shoot. It's definitely a concert environment, anything like that. And this camera does feel like, Nick, you were saying it would be good at sports stuff. I think equally it would be good at this sort of thing. I'd be curious to see what its low light performance is, and that hasn't been a topic yet. But
curious about that one.
Yes. And I have not seen any advertisements about low light,
which is usually not a good sign.
Yeah, no. But Sony is the one who made the A7S, which was that first mirrorless camera that blew everyone out of the water when it came to low light. So I have hope.
Yeah.
Right. So let's talk about the bad news.
Yes,
Nick, what does this thing cost?
So there was a episode a while back where we did like kind of a breakdown of different cinema cameras, and we kind of divided the thing into like, affordable being like sub 2,000, a kind of mid-range being like sub anything 6. To 2,000, sub 6,000, and then Bethel numbers, the 10,000 and up,
10,000 plus,
for cinema camera, that. But like this camera is essentially $6,000 for a photo camera.
Sure.
And the features are good, but here's something that we didn't talk about before that I found in my research. Sony also makes the A1 camera, which is a little bit more than $6,000, and it doesn't have any of these features, right? Here's the thing that, like, the big part of it. The A1 is a 50 megapixel sensor. This camera is a 24 megapixel sensor. And so my thought being processing power, right? One, this camera has to have a really good processor. And for it to be able to do all these things, we're going to be looking at a smaller megapixel size for these types of cameras moving forward until the technology gets better and better.
Interesting.
Because your 50 megapixel camera is going to be amazing, and it still has a rolling shutter, but is really, really fast, right? And so it minimizes some of that, but it's not
24 is also no slouch. That's not bad.
Yes. It's not
fine, but
but when I'm thinking of like when it comes to sports photography and stuff, right? When I have, is the NFL going to be utilizing this camera? Probably, but you're going to get better photo, or let me change that. Not necessarily better photos, larger photos with like the A1. And since they're so similarly priced, you're definitely exchanging certain things when making that purchase, I'd say.
For sure. Yeah. And I guess I'm just trying to think like practically about using this in church settings. Like if worship is the one reason that I need this camera, and I don't even know how it compares with low light until I get to try it. Like I don't need this shutter speed for an outreach event coverage. Hopefully, hopefully people aren't handing out food really fast. I don't know if I need it for the pastor, unless my pastor's like super Pentecostal and doing flips on stage. I don't know if I'm using these for headshots. There's some definitely cool things here. feature. I'm just curious, like
Right.
how many of these features are going to be like hyper, like church and ministry supportive.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, on that note, I do feel like, especially in larger churches, you know, I could see like a transformation church using this. I could see an elevation church using this.
Sure.
Like those environments are also a lot more lit, like lighting wise, and lit otherwise, right? Than some
Sure.
churches smaller might be. So
Yeah.
I could see it being used like practically there, but like I'm just having a hard time
Yeah.
hearing, like, it sounds like a lot of these tools and resources are going to be like we're going to see them on future cameras that will make more sense for churches to buy. This initial one, I just don't know if it's there with that price point.
Yeah. And that's what I think is that's why I say like Canon and Nikon have a lot that they have to build towards here.
Sure.
Because as this gets more affordable, I don't know why you wouldn't want to eliminate banding and
I mean, the global shutter sounds phenomenal, especially like the amount of time that I've gotten banding on. I mean, LED walls are all the thing right now, and a lot of churches can't afford the really high quality LED walls, so they get the LED walls that are going to have a worse refresh rate and going to cause more banding on the whenever you're taking content, video and camera wise. So the global shutter honestly sounds like the most impressive component of this piece to me. I mean, maybe not impressive. That crazy amount of capture is interesting. I also don't know, like, if I did that like burst shutter, like I don't need 150 still images of my one lead singer doing the same pose, just different iterations. Like that's so much to process through.
One of my very first thoughts, and I think I joked to Nick after we were talking about the first time, because Nick and I have shot a lot of events together, and I am someone who's kind of conservative with my click. Like I wait until I have the perfect shot. I take it. I take maybe 3 or 4 and then I'm done. Nick is a spammer. He hits the button all the time. And my first thought was, I would never want to edit photos of an event that Nick shot with this camera, because I would be scrolling through so much trash.
Listen,
get the good ones.
Listen.
There's good photos.
You can't have a photo you don't take. You can't have a photo you don't take.
What does that mean? Yes, you do. I'm not going to take it.
If you don't take a photo, you don't have it, right? So take a lot of photos.
Regardless, I don't think this camera should be important news for 98% of churches. Please do not, unless you have more money than you know what to do with, do not petition for this success. You could buy 2 or maybe 3 other really good photo cameras. And this is without the lens.
Yes, this is body only
for this price. The thing that the reason we want to talk about it today is because of the implications into the future. If Sony is finally making this innovation that's been sort of a conversation for a long time, I know Jonathan Yip has talked about some really expensive high-end cinema cameras have this feature. Now it's bringing down into the prosumer world. It's hopefully that tech, which is mostly processing. To my understanding, the biggest barrier has been the processor that's able to handle this stuff. If that continues to get cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, as things tend to do, I mean, could we end up with global shutter on our phones in 5 years, in 10 years? Like,
we'll see.
That seems really cool. I'll also say, when it comes to the pre-shooting thing, if you have an iPhone and you do the live photos thing,
perfect example.
Technically can do that already. You take the picture and then you could just scrub in the timeline and pick the exact moment in the thing. So that, the new technology innovation, like the world of photography, is not dead. People are coming up with new ideas all the time, I'm excited to see global shutter come in, hopefully sooner than later, into even less expensive options.
And it is worth touching on. I don't want to spend too much time on it because we've talked a lot about AI recently, and I don't want to dwell too much on that today. But the AI processor, the amount of ways that it understands and identifies subjects and is able to help be precise with that focus, like, I think even when we did our episode a couple weeks back about cinema cameras, as long as that kind of technology continues to become the norm, I think it's just going to only help us down the line when it comes to more affordable stuff. If they can figure out how to make this processor, how to perfect this processor and higher end, more expensive cameras that a larger kind of professional breadth of people are going to be using, and they are able to continue to condense those down while still being as effective for the long term, like monetarily for churches, I think we're only going to benefit from those. So,
I hear that, man.
Yeah.
Here's hoping.
Well, Nick, did you have anything else on the Sony camera, the A9 III? Do you have anything else today for us?
No,
That's the
not
long
really.
and short of.
Yeah.
Well, I'm really curious to see what'll come from it. And Nick, if you
Sure.
ever get to shoot an event like that, just let us know how many the pure volume of photos that you take on that camera.
Will do. Will
Buy
do.
a 4 terabyte
To-
hard drive per wedding.
To quote, yeah. Okay, that was another thing. You have, I believe, it's special SD cards you need for it. Too.
Oh,
Yeah. Anyway, but to quote Greg in our comments, who was quoting Michael Scott, who was quoting
Wayne Gretzky.
Wayne Gretzky, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So, and with that, I'm free. I'm allowing the moving to the next topic.
Oh my gosh. Oh, beautiful. Okay, well, guys, we're going to get into our final topic for the day then. And this has been something we've been talking about a lot lately, especially as we get to film and capture events. And as in general, we've just had a lot of experience in the Sunday service experience and production and processes. We've learned that in this field, there are a lot of last minute changes. Last minute changes come up all the time. They happen all the time. And then, wouldn't you know it, they impact in a lot of ways the content creators, the creatives, the ministry creatives, the digital media creatives, because they're oftentimes the ones that are most impacted when something changes last minute, whether that's a slide or a video, or maybe the person that they're photographing on stage, or the lighting scene, or the needs of the service. Like, last minute changes are a reality that exists in our field. Hard stop. We have to, I think, one of the things we've been talking about is we have to learn how to navigate them. And the hardest thing about last minute changes is so often they're unexpected. So how do you navigate the unexpected? Recently, Caleb and Nick were able to go to SALT conference. I think that was like 2 or 3 weeks ago. And great. Caleb was actually able to support their production team with a lot of the creation aspect of that. So Caleb, I'm sure that in that setting, because you've told us about it, there were a lot of last minute changes. Yes.
Yeah. Yep. That's why I was there. Yeah. So I was, they built this huge, magnificent LED wall. It had like curved pieces and everything. It was very cool. And my job was to fill it and make it look good. And they gave me a bunch of stuff to create ahead of time, kind of backdrops for the speakers and stuff. But then they also brought me out specifically to make what they didn't know they needed yet. And surprise, we have a topic today. There was a lot that they didn't know they needed yet. And being able to work very quickly and punch out, for me, it was slides, it was graphics and stuff. Like, you know, sometimes within an hour of it needing to go up on the screen. That's a skill set. That's definitely something that I'm sure in the church world, like, we know we're very familiar with. I was just doing sort of the extreme versions with like, okay, we need 15 slides today that we need to put up, and we don't even have content for them yet. So here you go, have fun. Right. But it was super exciting. And the whole team there is fantastic. Working with them was such a blast and such a blessing to be able to work with people across the country that are all so excellent at what they do in the church world. So we wanted to talk today about sort of how to be good at that, and occasionally maybe also how to not have to do that. It's not talking in the SALT world, but in the church world, we're all very familiar with the fact that a lot of people, and we've been in these seasons before, where it feels like last minute changes are coming all the time, that you are constantly getting your slides from your pastor on Saturday at like 11 o'clock, and you just got to run with it. Right. Yeah. So we want to talk a little bit about how to build a culture around maybe not having last minute changes, and then how you can do them when it's necessary. So Zach, I know you've got the first thought today.
For sure. Yeah. So I think each of us are bringing kind of our own perspective and our own twist to this. So I'll try to do the best that I can, because there's a lot of stuff that you can break down throughout the entire process. You know, we've talked about in production, you have pre-production, production, and post-production. These are different elements that are essential. But within each of those avenues, there's ways that we've learned, I think. I mean, between the three of us, we've got like, 15 years of combined ministry experience. And
it's a lot more than that.
I don't think
you need to update your number.
Probably at least. But the point being that, wouldn't you believe it, in those years, there's been a lot of this fluctuation and a lot of dealing with these last minute things. So I think where I wanted to start the conversation out, as far as like tips, tricks, and advice, The very first thing when navigating last minute changes is getting your heart right. Hard stop.
Mhm.
Beginning of everything, how you react to and process stress, because last minute changes equal stress, is first and foremost your and my responsibility alone. So if for some reason in our lives we're experiencing something, or like, we have home stress, or maybe we have work stress, or maybe we have something else in between, we had a really bad drive,
Sure.
how we receive and interact with stress impacts the world around us. So it's our responsibility alone, first and foremost, to address and deal with those stressful situations. It's really easy for us to feel something. Like, take it from me, Enneagram 2, I'm a feeler. When I feel something, I emit it deeply. My personality just emits it. People can feel it around me. It is my responsibility, first and foremost, to take care of that feeling and that response. We talk a lot about the Enneagram. We have in the past. We've brought on Brian Lee, and we've talked about it kind of extensively. Each one of us, whether or not you prescribe to the Enneagram, the reality is that each one of us gravitate toward responses that are indicative of stress in our lives. So that doesn't mean that the stressful responses that we have when last minute changes come up are necessarily unhealthy behavior. However, it does indicate that we're operating from a place that is grounded in stress, and it can become unhealthy if we don't deal with it and address it. So our health starts with you and I and how we're prepared to handle the unpredictable. I know that maybe feels like a bit of a dichotomy, like how do you predict how to handle the unpredictable? But if you get your heart right and prepare kind of your mentality for those kind of things, I think that changes the game. I've been listening to the Trevor Noah podcast recently, and in one of the episodes, he was talking about sometimes you should just expect to be dealing with these unexpectable situations. He said something along the lines of like, expect to be let down, not in like a negative sense of like everyone's going to let me down, but expect that something difficult will come along that's going to make my job, my life, my experience so much harder.
Mm-hmm.
And if I anticipate those things, I'll be able to deal with the punches of this a lot better. So get your heart right when dealing with or preparing for last minute changes, because they are going to happen. From there, this is a conversation kind of twisting into culture and the culture of your environment and the culture of your church, because culture at the end of the day is the reality of what is in your organization, not the reality of what you want it to be or what you hope for it to be, but the reality of what is. So if your church has a culture of last minute changes, that is a culture that is deeply ingrained within the organization, and that has to be addressed before you make any of the other changes that we talk about today. Culture starts from the top down. Clarity leads to unity. So whenever there's clarity, whenever there's cohesion, whenever there's a healthy culture established by your leadership, whether that's your pastor, your executive team, or otherwise, it starts with the person at the top. But what leaks down, whether it's healthy or unhealthy, is the culture that's around it. So in an unhealthy culture, unhealthy habits flourish when left unchecked. But when the culture is healthy, healthy disciplines can help further advance the mission. Accountability, and this is stepping into maybe something we as creatives don't have the ability to control, but accountability is essential, but only when it comes from the right structure that's in place. If accountability and structure is lacking, maybe a larger conversation needs to happen with your leadership. So is your church stuck on a culture of last minute changes? If it is, address first what's within yourself, and then address kind of the structure. Work alongside your leadership, whether that's your direct or whether that's your lead pastor. Find the relationships in which you can start to address those changes that are needed and start to get into those things. Beyond that, creatives, it's important for you to hear, organization is your friend. It's not your enemy. The beauty of
Caleb's reaction was just perfect.
This is not an ad. Whatever you hear from me is on you. But creatives, our natural bent is innovation. It's wonder. It's just tapping into the most creative source in all existence to use our skills to bring something to life. But in order for that something to come to life, that process, that building is still necessary. We talked about pre, pro, and post. That pre-production, the more pre-production you bring into a situation or project, this isn't always the case. There is such a thing as too much pre-production. There's such a thing as too much talking about it. Believe me, I'm a talker in our Blackbar conversations, and sometimes probably I talk too much. But pre-production is necessary in order to prepare and organize the processes by which you create. I love, as Blackbar, we use a software called Basecamp. Personally, for Lifehouse, I use a software called Monday. There's also Asana. There's a bunch of different resources out there,
Mm.
but make sure you spend time to get things squared away and organized so that things aren't missed, so that things are clearly communicated, and so that you and your team are on the same page of what is needed as you head into the weekend service. If you are lacking any kind of this structure, recently at Lifehouse, and this isn't prescriptive to everyone. This is just a tool we found valuable. We've gotten into the series called Working Genius, which is by Patrick Lencioni, in which he talks about every single person. It has things that are geniuses in their work processes, things that are competencies, so they're good enough at it in their work processes, and things that are frustrating in their work processes. So you can kind of break the 6 working geniuses down into 3 main categories. That's the ideation process, that's the activation process, and the implementation process. So each one of us is naturally going to be really good at something. We're going to be really frustrated by something, and we'll be kind of mid at everything else. So I just want to run through Working Genius real fast so I have an idea of, kind of these classifications. Um, some of us might have a working genius for wonder. So we have a natural gift of pondering the possibility of great potential and opportunity within a given situation. Or we might have an invention genius. So a natural gift of creating original and novel ideas and solutions. This is where creatives thrive. This is their bread and butter, right? From there, you have discernment. So a natural gift of intuitively and instinctively evaluating ideas and situations. So is what I'm creating culturally, communally supportive, relevant, and does it make sense in a way that's supporting and advancing the mission? Galvanizing is a natural gift of rallying, inspiring, and organizing others to take action. So for those of us that have volunteers, do we have that gift where we can naturally galvanize others to not only support our teams, but also to support the content we're creating? From there, you have an enablement, which is the natural gift of providing encouragement and assistance for an idea or project. So who are the people that are really good at project organizing, who are really good at helping you do the best that you can to advance the content you're creating? And then tenacity, which is, I think, probably one of the biggest average frustrations for any creative, is the natural gift of pushing projects or tasks to completion to achieve results. So that's kind of a breakdown of the working genius. And like I said, this is not something that you have to do. This is something that I found valuable. There's a lot of awareness is important, and then also developing structures and putting into place things that help your organization come together with similar language, similar processes, similar workflows. These are all super valuable and important for anticipating what's to come. I think the more work you do on the front end, or the more work you put into being responsible with the projects that are on your workload, will help you be able to fluctuate or adjust whenever a punch comes last minute that completely changes the game. So those are kind of like a brief flyover of some of the things that I was thinking that have helped me over the years deal with those last minute changes. I think whenever we're open to the idea of how the structure looks and what the end game is, the end objective of the content creating work, of the content that we're creating, needs to achieve, I think that's the space in which we can say, okay, I can change A and B and still achieve my same end goal without losing my mind over a project. So I don't know if you guys have any thoughts about that kind of big list I ran through. So
Yeah, I think mentality is definitely really important. Expecting that the last minute changes are going to come. You're not done with any project until it's already been shown. And then sometimes even still, you'll make edits between services. But just anticipating that changes are going to come, being flexible and everything, I think is a huge part of the battle, and not getting just destroyed by these sorts of things.
Yeah. I really like what Greg mentioned in our comment section here about how that, he spent the last couple of years cultivating a no stress atmosphere for their sound booth. And I think the next comment he said is kind of like the mantra for it, that God is bigger than any technological problem we might face, right? Having that kind of mentality moving forward, I think probably puts you in a position where you can handle last minute changes better than, you just kind of explode going, why are these happening all the time, right? And even so much as like John 16:33, where it talks about, in this world you're going to have problems, but take heart, I have overcome the world. Jesus speaking there, that where we work in the church media, right? We're gonna have times where things just happen last minute, and Zach, I love that you're kind of telling everyone this idea to like prepare your heart beforehand, because it's going to be a lot easier to grow good fruit, so to speak, if we've prepared the soil, our hearts beforehand, then if we're not, and would probably grow bitterness and other things instead of a heart of gratitude through these times
Yeah,
when they
and I
happen.
think I think we've talked a lot about, at least I've talked a lot about, like, what is your why? Like, what is the foundational
Hmm.
aspect of why you're doing what you're doing? And when you can keep that anchored on God, when you can keep it anchored on the mission of why you're hired to do a project, like there you'll find a lot more foundation, a lot more peace when things come.
Hmm.
And I think that's
Yeah.
just valuable to hang on to as creatives. It's really easy to lose our why when it feels like we're just doing project after project that's getting changed and changed and changed and changed. But I think if we can shuffle our mentality toward
Hmm.
the foundation of what we're doing things for, that changes the game.
For sure. So what happens when the changes come anyway?
Hmm.
That's my job. uh, when you're getting the call at 11:45 on Saturday, or you're getting the call at 8:30 on Sunday, and you need to make things happen, how can you make the change fast? I think the only really big point that I have for this one is build things you can break. So when it comes to the slides you're making, the video that you're making, the mix that you're throwing down, build something that is going to be flexible that you can
Hmm.
change last minute. And there's some thoughts I have in regards to this. I used to, back at Grand Rapids First, even I know Cordon's listening, he'll probably remember there was a time that whenever we got the sermon slides from Pastor Sam, I would, I built the whole template in Photoshop. I'm gonna just drop the text in Photoshop, and I exported every slide out as a PNG, and then I handed it all over. The problem was that when there was a last minute change, whether I was doing it, because I'm not usually in the booth, or if someone is, they would have to, instead of just going into ProPresenter or PowerPoint or whatever, changing the
Hmm.
text and then hitting play, they would have to open up Photoshop, retype in the text again, fix whatever text it's supposed to be, save that out as a PNG, drag it over, and put it up. There's so many steps involved right there, right? And yeah,
Yeah.
maybe I had a bit extra control over the specific typography and the leading and everything in Photoshop that I preferred. Great. But come Sunday morning, the ability to break it faster is more important than the tiny aesthetic advantages that I was getting in Photoshop. So you could take that mentality of building things you can break and extend it all the way out. I know a thing that Nick and I have done so many times, it has saved us probably weeks of render time. Is whenever you're going to render a really big project for video, and we talked about rendering a lot earlier today, when you finish the video, now you've just got to go make a cup of coffee or whatever as you wait 5-10 hours for this thing to bounce out. We've had projects that take 6 hours to render every time you want an edit. You imagine, oh, we found a typo. Well, there goes 6 hours where Nick's just staring at his computer, twiddling his thumbs, right? One thing that you can do is the next time you go to export your whole thing, export it out in a lossless format. So we use ProRes 422. If you have alpha, you need to use ProRes 444 with alpha, 4444 with alpha. But ProRes 422, just bounce the whole thing out and have that, and it'll be a big file. It'll be annoying because then you'll need to take that file again and convert it down to H.264 to send it to anybody so they can actually watch it. But then you slap that whole thing back into the timeline that you just exported. And because it's lossless, if they find that typo, you can go over and just edit that one little typo, however many frames that is up there for. And then the whole rest of your timeline is just the lossless file you already printed out, which takes no time at all to render. And now what was a 6-hour render is now a 5-minute render because you're only actually rendering the content that's new. That is such a time saver. Please start doing that for every and everything that you do in that world. It makes your timeline a little bit messier. You got this big thing on top of it. But for stuff that could change last minute, having a lossless version of that file is really important. And even, I mean, in the audio world, taking a mix that you have completely like fully finished out, there's no way that it'll change. It's going to sound good on Sunday. I tested it. Well, it might change on Sunday. Just bouncing out those stems so you don't have to worry about all the plugins and all the audio effects that you have, so you can make little mix tweaks here and there, and it takes no time to render. You can take this sort of thought process all the way down so that you're ready when the last minute changes come, and you can perform miracles, and everybody will look at you like, Caleb, how are you able to do this stuff in 10 seconds? It's because I spent an hour setting up the file 3 days ago so that I could turn these things around really fast. This is really the one time where I think extra powerful hardware in terms of your computer or whatever is actually important and should be a justification for you talking to your pastor about getting upgrades. When you need to make changes Sunday morning and you're waiting on Photoshop to open, you're waiting on After Effects or whatever else to open and save that file out, render it out, that's when the rubber meets the road. That's when you know the actual computing power you have matters quite a bit. So if you find yourself in those sorts of environments having to make those last minute edits quickly, you're going to need the hardware to be able to punch that out, even if it is an M1 MacBook Pro, as Gordon and I have been going back and forth about.
Listen, I'm just here watching these comments go back and forth. I'm like, oh man, we got
it's fine.
Fight going on.
It's fine. It's not a fight. It's a conversation about how I could get the same performance for cheaper. Never mind. Continue. Go ahead.
Caleb, can I add a part 2 to yours that I was thinking about as you're saying it? Each of us have the ability to learn how to break something, to build a structure well. Part 2, teach someone else to do that too. So like in the context of our weekend services where we have volunteers, the amount of times that like just the other weekend at Lifehouse, we had like 3 or 4 different things that needed changed between our practice and our service. And we had a very limited time to do so. If that was just up to me, I don't know if I could have done it to the quality of excellence that we did. But because we had 4 people on our team who knew how to deal with a variety of different problems, that was fixed right away. And we had time to spare, time to confirm, time to check. When we have volunteers, if we are not training them to learn what we have garnered, then we're just hoarding that information for ourselves. We're not helping anyone. But like a Caleb, I wouldn't know how to do the process that you just talked about with the lossless format. But if you invent the process, you teach me, there's now double the people that know how to do that process. And I think that's the key about volunteers. When you can equip and encourage them to be able to do the exact same problem solving that you did, that not only helps you deal with last minute changes, that helps your entire volunteer team with the last minute changes. And I think sometimes helping them equip and feel confident, like that's the difference between a healthy and an unhealthy culture where they don't feel like they have the tools equipped to support the weekend service correctly. So learn how to break it yourself and then teach someone else how to do the same.
Yeah. And if I can give one other thing here too, Caleb, it's really funny that the comments are developing into this conversation about file storage now too, because Nextcloud being a server thing, right, or Dropbox being an online thing, one way to help expedite render processes too, because one thing that you mentioned, Caleb, was like, hit render and now go get a coffee for the next 5 hours, is have a dedicated computer, which I know is money, but have a dedicated computer that is just built to render stuff, right? And if you can store all your files in the same cloud-based space, now that computer can just access the Premiere file or DaVinci or whatever you're using to edit, specifically speaking to video, and render it for you.
I will say, in general, these sort of last minute like tweaking stuff and everything, this is a wonderful time to have like a server in which all of your files exist in, because the last thing you want is and I don't remember I remember a dozen times Corey and I have been in this situation where he's calling me Sunday at 6 a.m, hey, I need this file, where is it? Well, it's on my computer that's sitting in front of me, right? When it should have been on the server in a place that he could easily access. So making sure that your finished project files or whatever are in a place that everybody on the team can get to. Hopefully everybody that you've trained, like Zach was talking about, is definitely a good idea.
I know for like our church, we use like a box.com, which is like a lesser known version of Dropbox and probably not as good. But as soon as I finish a graphic project, within that folder, I have the project files I have the finished files. And then I also have a PSD folder, so that if someone at campus, like we're a multi-campus church, if someone at campus number like 2 or whatever, not that there's a number monetary, whatever, but if someone at another campus needs to access those files and I'm in the middle of service and they need to change something out before their service starts a half an hour later, they've got access to the PSDs because it's in its place, it's organized, and it's on its folder. It doesn't have to be a server. you can use a file share a process just to get those processes in place.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So you've prepared your heart beforehand. You've prepared your mind to make sure that you're ready for when this happens. The call comes in on Sunday morning at 4 a.m. and you've been able to knock this out and meet expectations, exceed expectations. But now what happens, right? What happens after
You didn't
all
prepare your
this has
body.
happened?
You said, have you prepared your mind? Have you
derailed
prepared
me,
your
man.
heart?
I don't
I'm
know
so
what.
sorry.
Good night.
Oh,
What
Sorry,
do you
I
do
saw a
after,
window.
Nick?
What do you do? What do you do? Your body's not
Well,
prepared.
well, okay. So what I
I'm
was
so
gonna
sorry.
say,
I didn't mean
you're
to do
fine.
that.
You're fine. Let's just use this as a social media clip. I think people will love this. It'll be hilarious. Just let's start with that anyway. So yeah, all this has happened, and now you put in a lot of work. You've lost sleep over this.
Yeah.
What can you do? What happens? This is where we're talking about the cost. What does it cost your team, yourself individually, your pastoral team when these things happen? And I think this particular portion, we're going to be talking specifically to the leadership, the pastors, and then we'll talk to our creatives, right?
Mm.
So as a leader or a pastor or someone who is in charge over people, Zach, you made a great point about the volunteers. This could even be the creative who is over top of a volunteer team who made the call at 4 a.m. to change something. You want to understand that cost that individual something, right? In this particular example, we cost them sleep. We had them wake up earlier than they may have intended to, and then may have taken away time from their family, from their kids, from their spouse, from whatever things they were doing. Who knows? Maybe it was a call on vacation and it just had to get fixed, and so you had to break that work barrier to get it done, right? This is the cost of those last minute changes. And like we said before, we work in church media, right? This is going to be a thing that happens from time to time. There's just no way to get around it. If you're Pentecostal, like most of us here in the call, we're talking about the Holy Spirit. What's that?
Hallelujah.
Hallelujah. We're talking about maybe the Holy Spirit tells your pastor at 4 a.m. when he's praying and prepping for the thing that this is not the right word for this moment. We need to change the stuff, right? And so these things are going to happen. And that's why I love, Zach, why you talk about preparing your heart beforehand, and Caleb, why you build that structure so that when it happens, it doesn't take hours to complete it, right? So these things are going to happen. But having a after action plan will really help minimize these things from becoming a emotional and stress related problem for your team moving forward, right?
Yeah.
Something that I was incredibly grateful for back at Grand Rapids First, there was a season where we were working on something called the annual membership meeting, where basically it's a conglomeration of everything we've done in the previous year. We take all kinds of media, photos, video, animations and stuff, and we give a report about what happened during the previous year at Grand Rapids First. It's a great time to celebrate all the wins that the church had, but it's also an incredibly stressful season for me as an individual, because we're talking about render times earlier. This is really where it became like a 12-hour render, especially when we perhaps misguidedly shot on green screen that one year and had basically a 40-minute video that was entirely done on green screen. So
Stupid.
I know. We live and learn, man. We live and learn. But yeah, these things cost a lot. And I remember there was a season where there was a couple days in a row where I would bring my pillow in my car, and I would intentionally do that knowing that I was going to be sleeping at the church overnight, because I was too afraid to go home thinking that the render would fail. And it happened. Mm-hmm. So I would stay at the church, and usually what happened is like 6 o'clock would come around and I'd be like, I'm going home. I need my bed. I need to get some actual sleep. Right. But that was the cost where I was doing for about a week's time, very, very long extended days at work. And the solution our leadership team had was they very graciously approached me and gave me the option to basically, I don't know if they said it this way, but this is the way I interpreted it, was a blank check when it came to my vacation time, to
Right.
make up for all that. And so that particular year, I think I had a little bit of an extended Christmas vacation, which was wonderful because I forget what year it was at the moment, but my family, I'm in Michigan, my family's in Pennsylvania. That was a really good opportunity for me to be able to see my
Mhm.
extended family during that
Mhm.
that season. And so that's kind of the thing, is like, as a leader who is over top of people who are making these sacrifices for you, how can you minimize the cost it takes for them to be
Right.
able to do this?
Sure.
Because if you're doing this all the time, you're going to get a burnout creative. It's
Yeah.
just going to happen.
Yep.
That's how this works, right?
100%.
And if you're making, things and concessions for them to be able to potentially take the time it took to make that happen and give it back to them in another area, that individual also is going to be a lot more willing to make it happen for you when it needs to happen, right? um, and this creates a good thing for longevity for your employees, right? Or your volunteers. If your volunteer is consistently feeling like you keep asking them to do things at a level where it's a sacrifice for them, they're going to eventually say, I don't want to do this anymore,
Yeah.
Yeah.
right?
It's not
And
worth the
they're
cost.
right. No, it's not worth the cost. And on the other side, when it comes to the actual creative, speaking specifically to the creative, um, hopefully you have this with your leadership team, where that is something they are actively thinking about. But your first step to changing that, if that's not the case, is to talk to them, right?
Yeah.
Your leadership team, you know in the area of burnout, when your heart and mind is there, sometimes it's very easy to start thinking that everyone is your enemy, right? And you start hyper fixating on
Mhm.
things that just you know are become your problem, right? And you think
Yeah.
everyone's doing it because it's they're mad at you, or they don't like you, or
It's those
whatever.
kind of stress triggers I was talking about in my section.
You're right.
We
You're right, Zach.
naturally are going to go to a certain
hmm
place, and defensiveness
hmm
is oftentimes like that place where
hmm
stress really just wells up in
Right.
us.
But generally your pastor's not the trying to be an aggressor to you, or your leader is not trying to be an aggressor to you. They have 1,000 things that they're thinking of, that they're trying to deal with. They're not just thinking about, are the slides working on Sunday. They're probably thinking about the widow who just called saying that they're sick and they need someone to come down and pray for them. They're thinking about the funeral they had to do last week for the teenager that took their life, or something like that. They have so many other things that are weighing them down. And unless you are engaging in conversation about them, uh, you can't justify um, being angry at them for not helping, right? it because it's very possible they just don't know. And it's unfortunately, hopefully they would be able to look and see, but sometimes they're not able to. So let's take that responsibility on our own and be the ones to initiate the conversation, so that they can see where they might be lacking. And honestly, I bet you every pastor that you talk to is not going to be like, well, let me back up. Sometimes this has been the case, because I know people who have talked to us that this has been the case.
Yeah,
But
for
I
sure.
would say probably more often than not, your pastor's not going to say, you're just acting as an entitled person. Creatives are always this way. Suck it up, pull yourself up by your bootstraps and move forward. You're probably
That's when
going to,
you leave.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
you get
Those
out
are
of
called
that.
red flags.
Yes. Yes.
Leave.
Yes.
Exit
100%
that
justified.
way.
Get the heck out. Right. But your pastor's probably going to be like, say something like, I didn't know, or I'm really
Mhm.
sorry and I'm really trying to work on fixing this problem. I know this is tough. Can you give me a little bit more grace as I work to find a solution, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so for the creative, right, talk to your pastors. And then also, in the same way that Zach, this kind of becomes a bit of a loop,
Yeah.
right? Zach talked about preparing your heart. Now look to ways to help your heart remove the bitterness or the anger or anything that results from this happening. Find ways to relax, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Steal those moments away. Reevaluate how you're spending your time, and make sure that you are creating an atmosphere for yourself moving forward that is productive for you, that is healthy for your mental health and for your spiritual health and for your social health, the people around you. You know, I'll pull another Bible verse in here. If you have something against your brother, you need to go to him and talk to him about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you're getting to the point where you are so angry at your leadership team or your supervisor or whatever, that you have a root of bitterness in you, it's time. It is time to find a moment to go to them and speak to them.
Yeah.
And if you need another person there with you, please do that. Right.
Yeah,
And
for sure.
And Zach, I kind of hear your voice telling me to also mention, hey, it's not a bad thing to go seek out help too. Talk to a therapist. They might be able to help you understand your feelings and help you be able to navigate this as well before you go talk to them.
For sure. It's like me or something like that.
It's
like we
decade.
advocate for like therapy on this show. Yeah,
Right?
I think there's a lot to unpack in what you said, Nick. I really
Mhm.
like a lot of what you said. Like there's so many strong elements because and this is just even in like relationships, people
Mhm.
aren't going, it's unfair of you to assume someone else is understanding what you're feeling
Right.
if you don't
Mhm.
communicate it. So that's like a
Yeah.
baseline. And then beyond that, touching onto what you guys were saying about the reality of unhealthy environments and red flags, if this becomes a repeat offense,
Mhm.
if Easter and Christmas and then your summer experience and your fall winter kickoff, like if this becomes a repeat experience and you're not seeing changes, a larger conversation needs to happen. And if you continue to see this turn into a yearly thing, then maybe that's just an unhealthy environment. So I think there's like caution. We don't want to prescribe that your environment is unhealthy if they're learning how to develop processes. However, we also don't want you to be stuck in those situations that are just detrimentally impacting your emotional, physical, or mental or spiritual health.
Mhm.
It's really easy for us to build resentment about things whenever we have unidentified emotions. And that resentment can become negative. And
Mhm.
ultimately, when we're sitting in a place and living in a place and serving in a place and working of a place of like negativity and intensity and strong negative emotions, that can also impact the culture that we're in charge of. So like in my role, I oversee content throughout the week and I oversee things on the weekend teams as well as a creative team that I'm a part of. If I am carrying a heaviness that's causing unhealthy environments
Mhm.
around me, that's a me problem. And that needs to be addressed. You see so many, I
Yeah.
mean, oftentimes you'll see people lead into burnout that comes from a place of disenfranchisement from the church's or
Mhm.
organization's mission. Sometimes that thing is a necessary assessment to address. And then sometimes if we're hanging on to something and we're not willing to address it, there's there's a lot of like ways that we could take this conversation that is
Right.
just the biggest thing I want us to hear. Like Nick, I love that you ended it the way that you did with the thoughts that you had, because there's so many ways that our job in the last minute changes can weigh on us, and if we don't
Yeah.
deal with it, it's only going to crush us, and that's not good for us. That's not good for our families, and that's not good
Mhm.
for our ministries. So we have
Yeah.
to figure out how to navigate last minute changes.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I think it's just sort of tacking on to what has already been said in this regard. The one of the biggest problems that church media people face in terms of in terms of disenfranchisement, in terms of burnout and everything, is that your pastor does not understand the cost of what
Mhm.
he or she is asking you to accomplish, right?
Mhm.
No, we are basically wizards in the stuff that we do here. We
Yes.
perform magic.
Yes.
They're not quite sure how
Mhm.
it happens. We click buttons and wave our
Mhm.
hands around, and stuff pops out. They've never done that kind of thing. Chances are they're not familiar with the process. They don't know what it takes to make those changes. When we talk about fixing a typo in a video, they've made
Mhm.
typos in Word documents, and it takes 3
Yep.
seconds to edit. Why
Yep.
would it take any longer in your Premiere file, right?
Mhm.
And the way that is fixed is literally only communication, and they're not going
Yeah.
to be the ones to start it.
Right.
You have to be the one to start it. You have to communicate the
Mhm.
cost of those last minute changes, but also generally
Right.
speaking, whenever you're talking about a media project, make sure not everything. I
Mhm.
mean, don't tell them the specific plugins you're using in your mix or something like that. But the parts
Yeah.
that are relevant, they should be aware of what it is they're asking you to do, right? Not just the product that they're expecting, but the cost of that product in general.
Right.
Whether that's happening at Saturday at 11:30 or Monday at 8 a.m. Give them an awareness, because your pastor, your administration have a bunch of different budgets they're trying to figure out, a bunch of different like time and resources they're trying to invest there. And the more information they have about what the needs are in the accounting department and in the marketing department and in the facilities department and in the youth department, the more educated decision they can make on where to put those resources. Communicate with your pastors. Communicate with your pastors, and do it in love. Please do not be a jerk, and tell them that we sent you. Please be a good steward of your resources.
It's funny, Caleb. Actually, I'm reminded of 2 different other videos on this channel that we made. One that's specifically made to tell you how you can talk to your pastor, right?
Yeah.
And then
that was a funny skit.
It was a very funny sketch. Yeah. And then there's also the burnout video that we have as well, that I think it talks about a lot of ways to help navigate the creative through that process.
Yep, as well as several podcasts on burnout as well.
Yes.
Yep.
And not to be like too self-promoting here, because I do want to provide 2 further resources if what we're saying is like resonating with you, and maybe you've tried some of the stuff we've talked about but it hasn't worked. Of course, we talked about therapy. Therapy's amazing. It's massive. It's valuable if you can find a good foundation for that. Thing number 2, we have our Discord for a reason. We built our Discord to support, educate, encourage, and inspire other creatives. And if you feel like you just need a place to be heard, maybe to even process through what you're experiencing, like, please come and talk to us. We have our Caleb, Nick, and I, as well as a great certified pros team that are all available for you to reach out. Like, we're not just some guys on YouTube that you can't ever contact with. Like, come to our Discord, talk to us about if you need it. And Blackbar as an organization, we have the ability to give coaching, to provide advice in these kind of situations. And if we're not equipped to do some of the structural changes that we talked about, whether that's working genius or something else, maybe addressing and assessing the health of your community, like, there are actually church resources out there for that beyond us. So feel free to reach out to us for any of those things. I think at the end of the day, we wanted to talk about this conversation because we don't want you to feel alone in the conversation. We've all been there. Take it from us. Yeah. Nick and Caleb, look at the camera directly in the eye. Like, we've been there, right? The 3 of us have experienced this in so many ways. We've experienced the highs. We've experienced the lowest of lows in these categories. So please hear that you're not alone in experiencing this. I think that when we learn how to embrace the changes and the fluctuation and the unpredictability of ministry, it can be a feature of our experiences, not just a negative process, but it takes a lot of growing to get there. So I hope that makes sense as we land this conversation today. I don't know if you guys had any other closing thoughts, but I just want to make sure that you hear that you are not alone as you're going through your own experiences.
Yeah.
I'm happy with more closing thoughts. And we have 3 minutes before we run out of time on our podcast.
Nice. All right. So with that being said, then I guess we should probably wrap up things here. So,
all right, Nixie, why don't you take us home?
Oh my gosh, I'm not Nixie. I'm very interested to find out who that is, though. But I like the mystery of it too. It's very intriguing.
We'll never know.
We'll never know. So, but like Zach was saying, we do have the Blackbar community. Please join us over there. We do so many things. We provide help with our certified pros. If you have questions, it's also just a community where you can get together and talk with people who are in the same industry as you. And so please go over to our Discord, join us there. We'll welcome you there. Also, please like and subscribe to Blackbar and our videos. We love it when you comment. We love being able to talk to you back and forth, just like this conversation with Corden and Caleb about Mac versus PC, and somehow we dodged the bullet for
PCMR.
Dropbox. Yeah. And guys, if you ever need something specific, we are also a marketing agency, Blackbar Productions. We're happy to partner with you guys and help build something that you guys need for your services, for your websites. We do apparel, we make videos, pretty much anything that has to deal with pixels, we can do it. So please, if you need something specific, reach out to us too. Go to blk.bar. And again, thank you guys so much for joining us today on the Blackbar podcast. We'll see you in 2 weeks.